I always thought the morning of my college graduation would feel different. I had imagined it 100 times during 4 years of 18-hour study sessions, 2 jobs, and a financial aid office that knew my name better than most of my professors did. I had pictured my mother fussing over my cap, my father taking too many photos, maybe my sister rolling her eyes in the background the way she always did when attention landed anywhere near me. Even that version, the annoying version, the one with eye rolls, sounded good to me. It sounded like family. What I got instead was a sticky note on the kitchen counter. "We're taking Danielle to New York for her portfolio showcase. You understand. Congrats on graduating. Mom, no signature from my father. No mention of the ceremony starting at 10. Just that word at the end. Congrats." Spelled out like a text from someone who barely knew me. I stood in the kitchen in my gown, still holding the bobby pins I was going to use to fix my cap, and I read that note 3 times. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's dog barked once and went quiet. I set the bobby pins on the counter next to the note, and I stood there for a long moment doing absolutely nothing, because there was nothing to do. They were already gone. My sister Danielle is 4 years younger than me and has been the center of our family's universe for as long as I can remember. I want to be careful here, because what I'm about to say sounds like jealousy, and I spent a long time thinking it was. I've since learned the difference. Jealousy is wanting what someone else has. What I felt was something quieter and more exhausting. It was the slow realization that I had been assigned a role in my family that I never agreed to play. Danielle was the artist. Danielle was sensitive. Danielle was sensitive. That was the explanation I heard my whole childhood for why her school trips got funded and mine didn't. Why her meltdowns rearranged the entire weekend. Why my parents sat through 4 years of her dance recitals with the same intensity they never managed to bring to a single one of my academic achievements. I graduated high school with honors and a full scholarship offer. My mother told me that was wonderful and then spent the next 40 minutes on the phone with Danielle's dance teacher arguing about a costume fitting. I learned early to need less. I got a job at 16, then another at 18. I paid for my own textbooks, my own laptop, my own application fees. I told myself it was building character. Maybe it was. But it was also just survival, and there's a difference. The person who actually showed up for me during those 4 years was my roommate's older brother, Marcus. He came to help her move in freshman year and ended up staying for coffee and then staying for dinner, and then, slowly, over months of long phone calls and weekend visits, staying in my life in a way I hadn't expected. By the time we made things official, I had already trusted him with more than I'd ever trusted anyone. What I hadn't told him, because it embarrassed me, was the full picture of my family. He knew the outline. He knew Danielle existed, that my parents were complicated, that I paid my own way. What he didn't know was his own family's situation, which he'd never mentioned much either. Not in a hiding it way, just in a quiet way. Marcus was like that. He didn't announce things. I found out about his family the same way everyone else eventually did, by accident, and too late to pretend it didn't change anything. It was his mother, Evelyn, who let it slip. We were at their home in Connecticut for Thanksgiving, the first time I'd met his parents, and I made some comment about a painting in the hallway, something about the brushwork, and she smiled and said, "That one's from the Hargrove estate auction. Richard bought it the year we sold the Boston properties." She said it the way people mention the weather. Casual. Offhand. Like selling the Boston properties was a thing families just did. I didn't say anything. I looked at Marcus. He shrugged and said, "I told you my dad was in real estate." He just hadn't mentioned the scale. The Hargrove name, his mother's maiden name, was on 2 hospital wings, a university scholarship fund, and the kind of old money foundation that has a website with no donation button, because they're not accepting. His father Richard had built his own separate portfolio over 30 years. Together they were the kind of wealthy that doesn't look like wealth from the outside. No flashiness, no performance, just quiet, enormous, generational money. Marcus drove a used Subaru. He made his own coffee. He'd never mentioned any of it. When I told my best friend Priya about it later, she laughed for about 30 seconds and then said, "So you accidentally started dating someone who could buy your university?" Basically, yes. The reason none of this had reached my family was simple. Marcus and I had kept our relationship low-key while I finished school. He was in the process of transitioning into running a division of his father's company, and I was finishing my thesis. We weren't hiding, we just weren't announcing. My parents had heard his name exactly once, in passing, and hadn't asked a follow-up question. That was not unusual. By the spring of my senior year, we were talking about the future in concrete terms. He'd asked me on a Tuesday night over takeout containers and a documentary neither of us was watching if I wanted to build something with him. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We decided to make it official after graduation. Have the families meet. Do it right. He didn't know, when he planned to come to my ceremony with his parents, that my family would not be there. The morning of graduation, after I read the sticky note, I called Priya. She answered on the second ring. I could hear her getting ready in the background. She was graduating too, same ceremony, different college across town. I read her the note. There was a pause. "Your sister has a portfolio showcase," she said slowly. "Apparently, on your graduation day. That would be the one. And they just left. Without telling you. Left a note." Another pause. Then, "Okay, I'm picking you up in 40 minutes. Wear the gown, we're going." That was Priya. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew I wasn't, and she knew that wasn't the point. I fixed my own cap in the bathroom mirror, using the bobby pins I'd set down on the counter. I looked at myself for a moment. I had worked for this. I had written the thesis, taken the exams, eaten cereal for dinner 3 nights a week for 2 semesters to make rent. Whatever was happening with my family was real, and it was painful, and it was also not going to take this from me. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. He answered immediately. "Hey, almost there. My parents are already in the car." "My family left," I said. "They're in New York, something with Danielle." There was a beat. "We're your family today," he said. Simple as that. No dramatic pivot, he said. Simple as that. No dramatic pivot, no flood of questions. Just that. I held the phone for a second. "We're your family today." I had spent 4 years in that apartment trying to need less, and here was someone offering more without being asked. "Okay," I said. "We'll see you there," he said. "Save us seats." The ceremony was at the university's outdoor amphitheater. It was May, warm without being hot, the kind of spring day that feels like a reward. I walked across that stage, and when they called my name, summa cum laude, which I had not told my parents about because telling them things that mattered had started to feel pointless. I looked out into the audience and found Marcus in the 3rd row. He was standing. His mother was standing. His father was taking a photo on a phone he was clearly not accustomed to using, tilted at a strange angle, but trying. I don't have a word for what that was. I've looked for one. The closest I can get is held. I felt held. After the ceremony, we took photos on the lawn. Evelyn had brought flowers, actual flowers, a real bouquet, the kind with a ribbon, and she handed them to me like it was nothing, like of course she'd thought to do this. Richard shook my hand and said he'd read my thesis abstract online and had questions, which was the most anyone in a parental role had ever said to me about my academic work. My phone buzzed during the photos. My mother, "How was it? Did they do the individual names?" Followed 3 minutes later by my sister. "Mom said you graduated." "We're at the most amazing gallery right now. Wish you could see it." I put my phone in my pocket and smiled at the camera. The part I haven't told yet is what happened 2 weeks later. Marcus's father had a contact at a regional news outlet, not anything national, just a well-regarded local station, who was doing a segment on young professionals making moves in the city's business landscape. Richard had mentioned me offhandedly in a conversation, something about my thesis research on urban economic development, and the producer had reached out. I almost said no. I'm not someone who seeks attention. But Priya read the email over my shoulder and said, "You wrote 90 pages on this topic and you're going to say no to 6 minutes on television?" I said yes. The segment aired on a Thursday evening. They filmed at Marcus's company's office, which is in a building downtown that has his family's name on a small plaque by the elevator. Easy to miss if you don't know to look. They interviewed me about my research, about the scholarship program I was developing with Evelyn's foundation, about what I was hoping to build. They mentioned Marcus briefly, and by extension the family, and by extension, without making it the point, the scope of what that family represented in this city. It was not a flashy piece, it was a thoughtful piece. But it ran at 6 and again at 10, and it was picked up by 2 other outlets the following morning. My phone started ringing Friday at 7 a.m. My mother called 4 times before 8. My father called twice. Danielle sent 11 texts, the first of which read, "Why didn't you tell us? Who is he?" I looked at the texts. I looked at the missed calls. I thought about the sticky note on the kitchen counter. "Congrats on graduating." I didn't call back. It wasn't a dramatic decision. There was no moment where I sat down and made a declaration. It was just that, when I looked at my phone and thought about picking it up, I felt nothing that made me want to. Not anger. Anger would have meant there was still something lived there, still a current running. It was quieter than that. It was the recognition that I had been waiting my whole life for a call that never came, and now that they were calling, it wasn't because anything had changed. It was because the math had changed. Evelyn noticed I seemed distracted that weekend. We were in her garden. She grows tomatoes with the same focus most people reserve for serious projects. And she asked, without preamble, if I wanted to talk about my family. I told her the short version. She listened all the way through without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Some people only look up when something shines. That's not your failure, that's their limitation." She went back to her tomatoes. I sat with that for a long time. I did eventually respond to my mother. Not by phone. I wrote an email, which I drafted 4 times and sent on a Sunday afternoon. I didn't write it in anger. I wrote it as clearly as I could, which was harder. I told her that I had read the note they left on my graduation morning. I told her that I had walked across that stage in front of people who chose to be there. I told her that I loved her and that I needed distance, and that I didn't know yet what the shape of our relationship would look like going forward, but that I needed her to understand why. She replied 3 days later. The email was long. It talked about how hard it had been to manage Danielle's sensitivities over the years, how she had always known I was strong enough to handle things, how she hoped I understood that loving 2 children differently didn't mean loving one less. There was an apology in there somewhere, but it was the kind that explains itself into a justification before it finishes apologizing. I read it twice. I didn't reply. My father sent a separate email, shorter, that said he was proud of me and that he was sorry they missed the ceremony and that he hoped we could talk. That one, I sat with longer. My father was not a villain in my story. He was something harder to be angry at, a man who had spent 30 years following the path of least resistance and had arrived somewhere he didn't entirely intend to be. I didn't have room to carry his regret on top of everything else. I told Marcus about both emails. He listened, and then he asked what I needed, not what he thought I should do. What I needed. "I need this to not be the thing I'm thinking about," I said. So we drove out to the coast and walked on the beach for 2 hours and talked about everything except my family. And somewhere in the middle of that, I realized I was laughing, actually laughing, at something he said, and the weight hadn't gone anywhere. But I was carrying it differently. Danielle called me directly, once, about a month after the segment aired. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was almost entirely about herself, how shocked she'd been, how she hadn't known, how she felt like she'd missed something important. And somewhere near the end she said, "I just want to know if we're okay." I thought about calling back. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. The thing about Danielle is that she wasn't a cartoon villain. She wasn't scheming. She was someone who had been handed a position in our family's hierarchy and had never once been asked to question it. That doesn't excuse the years of small cruelties or the way she performed helplessness whenever it was convenient. But it complicates the story, and I've made peace with the complication. I didn't call back, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I was finally at 26, allowing myself to choose where my energy went, and she had never in 26 years asked, "Are we okay?" until the answer mattered to her. Maybe someday. I don't know. I leave that door slightly ajar in my mind, not swinging open, just not locked. What I didn't anticipate, what none of my careful planning for a quieter life had accounted for, was the scholarship announcement. 3 months after the segment, Evelyn's Foundation launched a new program, a full-ride scholarship for first-generation college students in our county, focused specifically on students who had paid their own way through secondary school. The scholarship was named at Evelyn's quiet insistence and over my significant objection after my thesis. There was a small ceremony. Local officials came. A reporter from the same outlet that had run the original segment covered it again. This time there was a photo, me and Evelyn and Marcus, standing in front of a building that would house the new community resource center the foundation was funding, that ran above the fold in the lifestyle section. My mother called 7 times that day. I had my phone on silent. I saw the notifications after dinner. I thought about what Evelyn had said in the garden. Some people only look up when something shines. I thought about the sticky note. Congrats on graduating. I thought about standing in the kitchen in my gown alone with bobby pins in my hand, looking at 7 words on a piece of paper. And then I thought about the 3rd row of the amphitheater, about a woman I'd known for 6 months, holding out a bouquet of flowers like it was the most natural thing in the world, about a man fumbling with his phone at a strange angle trying to get the shot, about Marcus on the phone saying "We're your family today" in a voice that didn't need to try. I put my phone down. I finished my dinner. I helped clear the table. I didn't call back. The best revenge isn't something you perform. It's something you build, quietly, out of everything they assumed you couldn't. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It just shines, and some people only look up when something does. I've thought a lot about what it means to be underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best, not in a bitter way. I'm past bitter. But in a clear-eyed way, the way you look back at a chapter of your life and finally understand what it was teaching you while it was happening. Because it was teaching me something, I just didn't have the language for it yet. Here's what I know now. The people who leave don't always leave because they don't love you. Sometimes they leave because they've decided, quietly and without ever saying it out loud, that you don't need them, that you'll be fine, that you're the strong one. And they're half right. I was fine. But fine isn't the same as okay, and okay isn't the same as not needing anyone at all. I needed people. I just stopped asking. What I've come to understand about Danielle is that she never had to build anything. Everything that came to her came easily or came through our parents clearing the path. And when you've never had to build, you don't develop the muscle for it. You don't learn what you're actually made of. In a strange way, being overlooked my whole life gave me something she never got. I learned to carry my own weight, and then to carry more, and then to discover that I was stronger than I thought. That's not luck. That's consequence. What you practice, you become. I practiced endurance. I practiced showing up for myself when no one else did. By the time graduation morning came and I stood in that kitchen alone reading a sticky note, I didn't fall apart, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I had been training for exactly that moment for years without knowing it. Evelyn said something in her garden that I keep coming back to. She said some people only look up when something shines. I think she was right, and I think the painful extension of that is this. Some people never look up at all. You cannot spend your life waiting for that moment. You cannot perform your own worth for an audience that has already decided what seat to give you. Marcus never needed me to be impressive. He knew me before the news segment, before the scholarship announcement, before any of it. He knew me when I was eating cereal for dinner and falling asleep over my thesis. That's the person he stayed for. Everything that came after was just life unfolding. The shining wasn't for them. It was never for them. What I want to say, if I'm being honest, is this: resilience isn't something you find in a crisis. It's something you've been building all along. In every small moment you chose to keep going when it would have been easier to give up. Every shift I worked, every bill I paid, Every graduation requirement I met without anyone checking in. That was me building something. I just couldn't see the shape of it yet. The calls came. I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. I finally understood that responding wasn't going to change anything that had already been decided a long time ago by choices that had nothing to do with me. And that was the most freeing thought I'd had in years. The best thing you can do with a family that made you feel invisible is to build a life so full of light that invisibility becomes impossible. Not to prove something to them, to prove something to yourself. I'm still building. I think I always will be. But I'm building it with people who showed up, in the third row with flowers, with a fumbled phone tilted at the wrong angle, trying. That's what I'll take forward,